Why is that? Why is it such an emotional thing for teachers to be dealing with plagiarism? Well, one of the reasons is because plagiarism is one of the greatest obstacles to a student developing their own authentic voice, which we want so very much for students to do. And the other reason is that we work so darn hard to teach them not to do it. So it's very upsetting when it happens. Jeanne Lambert has been researching, exploring, and developing some very effective ways of dealing with these challenges. And I hope and I know that tonight, after her presentation, you will take away some insights and effective strategies for dealing with these challenges. And something that you'll be, I'm sorry this is happening at the end of the semester, but now you'll be ready to bring this to your planning for your writing classes in the next semester. I have the great honor and good fortune of knowing Jeanne and having her on our wonderful ESL faculty here at the New School. She is an inspiring and inquiring teacher of academic writing to our degree students. She's also a very generous colleague and a real teacher's teacher, who's a wonderful resource for teachers everywhere. I know for the last year she's been doing her dog and pony show and taking a tour around the United States, doing trainings and giving presentations on teaching academic writing at TESOL conferences and various schools. So she is really a fantastic, fantastic resource. And all of these ideas have been synthesized in her newly released from Cambridge University Press book series, Final Draft, which you will all leave with a copy, thanks to Cambridge University Press. Speaking of, thank you to Tom Dare, our regional representative, and our local Cambridge University Press for generously providing refreshments this evening, and these books. So please do stay after the presentation and the brief Q&A to talk more, to eat, to get books, and enjoy the bounty. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Jeanne Lambert.
Thank you, Caitlin, for that lovely introduction. And welcome everyone this evening. I'd like to also welcome you. Thank you so much for attending. I'm very glad to be here tonight to talk about academic writing and also to get a chance to socialize. We don't often get a chance to socialize, especially across institutions, and I'm looking at it and I see lots of different people from different places here today. So I look forward to socializing after the presentation. Today, I'd like to present some concrete things that I think you can use in your classes to help your students develop their academic voice. Some things may be new, some things may be familiar to you, but I'm hoping you can walk away with something you can use right away or tweak or make your own in some way. I especially like to offer some things that I think that can be small changes in your curriculum that might have a big impact, okay? I'm not sure if Caitlin mentioned, but I've been teaching for 20 years. And I started teaching academic writing really because I wanted to help my students with their goals. And writing, of all the skills, was tied directly to their goals, right? In terms of the gatekeeping skill, right? In terms of promotions and grades and exams, writing is the gatekeeping skill. It was and it still is today, right? There are some programs that have all skills assessments, but writing is still the key for most of our students. So I spent the last 20 years trying to help my students improve their writing, and I've been observing their writing habits, and I've been reading the relevant literature, and I've been doing some of my own writing along the way. So that's what's led me here today, to share some of my insights with you. Speaking of my students, I'd like to start the presentation off with a quote from one of my students. This was a student in my academic writing course here at the New School. This was a few semesters ago. And she wrote to me about how she felt about her college writing assignment. So I just want to share this quote. I'm going to move around here. If you can't hear me, let me know. I've got this mic that can also pick up my voice. So she wrote, "So many things are too abstract and incomprehensible to me." You know, we've had this chance to have email with students today, and I get an email like that, it really hit me, right? She's really struggling with writing in her college classes and in my class. And I remember this student. She was quiet in class but diligent. She came to every class. She came on time. She did all the reading assignments that I had students do. Little reading assignments. They weren't writing heavy. Maybe they just had to notice some rhetorical feature in the text. Always turn them in. Then when the first writing assignment came due, she didn't turn it in. And I thought, okay, well, what gives? You know, that doesn't really jive with her classroom behavior. So I asked to see her after class and asked her why she didn't turn in the writing assignment. And she was on the verge of tears, really, over writing. She revealed to me that she felt completely inadequate when facing her college writing assignments. She felt like her educational background had not prepared her to do academic writing in English. She'd studied English in her country for a number of years, and I think that contributed to a feeling of failure. She sort of felt like, you know, I've been studying English, and now I'm here in the US, and I can't produce it like I want to. She talked about her educational background. She felt like she didn't get a chance to express her opinions and support them. She didn't do a lot of critical essay writing. She didn't use the terms wrote and drill, but I gleaned that from the topic, that, you know, from the conversation, that was part of her background. And so she was really stuck. She just couldn't get this first writing assignment going. And in a few minutes, when I share one of the strategies, I'm going to come back to that because she had a little bit of a breakthrough with something very small that I did in class that I'm going to share in just a minute. So I want us to think about her, though, as we move through the presentation, and we think about how some of the suggestions that I'm going to make will help my student, did help my student, and maybe will help your students, okay? But before we move on for the rest of the presentation, I'd like us just to take one moment to reflect on why we feel that writing is such a challenge for our students. Why is writing the skill that lags behind the other skills, right? Why do you think that it's so challenging? Other than the L1 background like my student had, what are some other reasons? Can you take just 1 or 2 minutes to talk to the person next to you and say what you think are the writing challenges that our students are facing, maybe other than the L1 background issue? What are the other challenges? Just 1 or 2 minutes, introduce yourself. Top challenges. I came up with a list, and it sounds like a lot of the things that you're saying. I think I'll just share briefly viewing writing as a task rather than communication, overwhelmed by the complexity. It's a long, painstaking process for writers, right? I think academic writing often seems disconnected from real communication. Effective factors, and then this issue of being unaware of the effort involved. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've had students come up to me and say, it took me 3 hours to write this essay. And I think that would have taken me, 12 hours, right? And then I still would have worried about it. But I think if your expectation is that it won't take very long, and then it does, so you feel like something's wrong. Either you're not doing something right, or this is just really difficult, right? So I think there are many factors, but I like to take the opportunity to reflect on the struggles that our students face with writing, because I don't know about you, but for me, I can get very involved in my curriculum writing my materials, which I've gotten very good at over the last 20 years, and I'm thinking about the outcomes and the skills and the things I want them to do, and that's the experience that I'm having of the class, and then I realize that there's another experience that's happening here, and this is the student experience. This was my student, who felt like everything was too abstract and incomprehensible, and I want to remember that so that I can design activities that help students find a way into academic writing, because I think that they don't have a way in, many of our students. Right? So that's why I wanted to just take a moment to reflect. I'm constantly having to think about this myself, where they're coming from. For the rest of the talk, I'd like to focus on 3 main areas. One is emphasizing the purpose for writing, why we write the way we do in academia. Effective vocabulary instruction with an emphasis on corpus-informed vocabulary. And then skills for avoiding plagiarism with an emphasis on paraphrasing. And why these three areas? I was thinking about how to arrange this talk and what I wanted to talk about, and I decided that all of these areas are areas in my curriculum where I've made small changes that have had a big impact in helping students to develop their academic voice. So I wanted to share them with you today, and I feel like if there's something that you can take away, it's not something that you have to sort of turn your curriculum upside down. There are small changes that can lead to something a little bit larger for the students. So let's go back to purpose for academic writing. As we've just discussed, our students often feel disconnected from academic writing, right? Why wouldn't they? You know, it's full of these new conventions, and many of them have had educational backgrounds that have viewed writing as a task rather than writing as communication. And I don't mean task-based learning of communicative language teaching. I'm just saying viewing writing as a task to be completed. You know, that approach that, well, you have to learn these things for college, and so we're going to practice them, and we're going to practice them because you're going to have to do these things in college. You know, it's circular, where's the purpose for that? It's not very enticing, right? To think, you're going to have to do this in college, so we're going to have to practice this, right? Where's the student in that, right? The student is the writer after all, you know? The student is not the one having the assignment done to them. They are the one that will do the assignment, right? But the student doesn't feel like the writer. The student feels like the assignment's being done to them, right? So I feel like it's my job to help students understand that academic writing is an opportunity for them to express their ideas, right? And formalize their thinking and formalize their writing. So how can I help students realize that that's an opportunity? That seems like a daunting task, right? Because I think a lot of our students don't see this as an opportunity, right? So I have a couple of suggestions. One is that I teach the rhetorical modes inductively rather than deductively by using real-world reading and connecting it to academic writing, and I'll talk about what I do in practical terms in just a minute. And then also making sure to connect the student's personal voice to academic writing. There is a connection, actually, for all of our voices, right, with academic writing. It's not separate to me. So let's go back to this idea of an inductive approach. So what is an inductive approach to teaching rhetorical modes? In a nutshell, I just want to focus on the purpose for communicating in any given mode. Why is the writer choosing to communicate in a certain way, rather than focusing on rules first and conventions and patterns of organization, right? So I wanted to share this quote by Professor of English Amy Devitt from the University of Kansas, who writes a lot about writing and writing difficulty. And this is from an essay, Teaching Critical Genre Analysis. And she writes, seeing genres as things with elements that have purposes rather than rules opens students to see genres as created by people, achieved by aims, not just as pre-existing and irrevocable constructs into which they must fit. So purposes rather than rules, created by people to achieve aims. So that is my focus with teaching the rhetorical modes inductively. So how do I do that? What does that mean in real terms? That means choosing a real-world reading that has elements of the mode that I'm going to explore, and exploring the purpose for communication, right? So for example, perhaps you want to have students write a summary response essay, right? Summary writing is so foundational, right? We do summarizing on almost every type of essay that we're going to do, right? In the past, I might have come in and said, you know, this is a cause and effect essay, or this is a summary response essay, and this is why you do it in college, and here's a way you could start it, here's maybe a pattern of organization. And then we'd read an article, and I'd have students write a summary response, and what do you think I would get back in terms of the papers? What would they look like? Anyone imagine?
Mostly a plagiarized summary. It's 2-sentence response.
Yeah, very short response, almost never, right? Not really a summary, okay? So not a summary, and then the response that's not connected to the summary at all, right? It's sort of not related. There's no sort of dialogue between the summary and the response. So there was this huge conceptual gap, right? The students didn't understand what is summary response. You know, if you think about our students, if you think about my student who felt like everything was too abstract and incomprehensible, right? Something like summary response could be totally new to her, right? So just giving a definition of what that is and talking about conventions starting out, that doesn't mean that that sort of seeps in and then suddenly they know what summary response is. So the way I teach today is by exploring a real-world reading. Here's an example. You can't read all the text. It's a little small, but it's a psychology article about information overload. It's not written in any formal, you know, introducing the summary and then a response section. But there's a psychologist and book are summarized, and you can elicit with the students, and you can do it in different ways. You can have them do it in groups, or you can do this in an open class, which I like to do, by asking students questions about the purpose for the communication. Why is the writer introducing the ideas of another person in this? Oh, well, sounds like they're an expert. This is the book title, and they're a PhD and a psychologist. They want to tell us something about this information overload. Yes, we need an expert to tell us so that we can then explore, right? That's why we write a summary. We're exploring ideas that we then may want to respond to, right? So we can sort of more organically explore these elements, and then we can show students, this is a really, I'm sorry that this is so small. I didn't see that the text was so small, but this is a student sample of a summary response that's in a more conventional style, starting out in this article, giving the author's name, then summarizing the main ideas, and then having a summary, then having a direct response section that talks directly back to the summary, right? So the idea here is just that starting out with the exploration and helping students conceptualize why we summarize in writing, and then showing students a more academic sample of maybe what you want them to do, right? So that's a way in for students that maybe haven't been exposed to rhetorical modes. Another suggestion for helping students find a way in is to connect their personal voice to academic writing. So how do I like to do this? I like to choose readings where there's a personal narrative embedded in an essay about a larger social issue. And so this is an example of a lesson that I do. I use this reading, The Case for Affirmative Action by Harvard law professor Charles Ogletree. And it was originally published in Stanford's university paper, alongside an essay, The Case Against Affirmative Action, by two other authors, Peter Thiel and David Sachs. So I use this essay first, though, because in Professor Ogletree's essay, he starts out with a beautiful narrative talking about his parents' experience in the segregated Jim Crow South, and how he wouldn't really have had an opportunity to go to Stanford and then go on to Harvard Law School and become a public intellectual if he had not been a recipient of affirmative action. Okay? So he starts out with that personal narrative, but then goes on to support his case for affirmative action in a more conventional way with logical reasoning and this summary refutation structure we know so well in argumentative essay writing. And he gives us statistics about the number of African-American PhD holders. And so with this essay, I'm able to help students see that there is a personal connection to larger social issues. I then ask students to try to think about something that they feel very passionate about. And if they were asked by their university newspaper to write on something that they feel very passionate about, what would it be? I asked them to do this as a homework assignment. The first thing they normally ask me is there a university newspaper? They are unaware. They are unaware that there's a university newspaper, and because we have technology in the classrooms, I'm able to right away pull that up and show them the New School, and at Columbia, The Spectator. So I asked them to think about what they feel really passionate about, and then try to connect that to a larger social issue in the same way that Charles Ogletree did. And the student that felt everything was too abstract and incomprehensible, this was her way into academic writing. When I had my after-class meeting with her where I said, hey, what gives? You know, where's your paper? She said, I said, what happened with the homework assignment? You know, we talked about, you know, this, what's your passion? And she said, well, I didn't come up with anything. I couldn't think of anything. And so I said, well, can we talk it through now? Is there anything that really sticks out? She got stuck, she couldn't say anything. I said, well, give it some thought. Maybe you could think if there's something that just seems unfair to you in society or in your society here, just give it some thought. You can come back in the next couple of days. But right away, she actually didn't need to give it thought. She said, actually, I feel that the testing that I've had to do all these years is unfair. And I said, tell me, what do you mean? She said, just all this testing that I've had to do in my, back home. And then I had to take the TOEFL, and that it's just been constant testing for her. And I thought, bingo, this is the thing that she's feeling really passionate about. And she ended up writing her first argumentative essay on why standardized exams like the SAT should not be at the top of the list in terms of criteria for U.S. college admissions, right? And she did a wonderful job, and she included her own personal experience and what sort of constant testing did for her. This is a great way in for students to let them know that there is a connection between academic writing and their voice. Why else write if we're not going to write about things that we care deeply about, that are, our social issues, right? So she wrote this great essay. It was a way in for her. It's also a great opportunity to do a lesson on the use of the first person, right? Because we often have to unteach things. Have you noticed that? You have to unteach things that our students come in with. So what are some of the things that we have to unteach? So use of the first person is one of those issues, right? If you pulled out 5 academic journals and you've combed through them from different disciplines, you'd see the use of the first person, right? Because we do, in fact, use the first person in academic writing. This is an opportunity to let students know that it's about how you use it, how effectively you use it, how it can strengthen your authorial voice or potentially weaken it, depending on how you use it, right? Okay, so this is just another way in for students into academic writing. I'd like to shift now and talk about how vocabulary is sort of a golden opportunity to develop students' academic voice relatively quickly, relative to other things like summarizing, right? Developing your ideas, writing a great thesis statement. These are all things that are challenging and take a long time, right? Vocabulary offers an opportunity for motivation. But we know that lexical proficiency is important. We know that it's a main way students are evaluated on exams by their professors, by us, right? When we get an essay and a student has really advanced vocabulary that's used accurately, we are impressed, right? It has an effect on how we see the paper. So just taking a moment to think about vocabulary and motivation. I've been reading a lot about motivation in writing recently. How to get students motivated to write. It's such a challenge. This quote is actually from an article developing the motivation to write. It actually is geared toward a K through 12 readership, but I thought that this sort of captured something about the challenges, right? That the nature and difficulty of the process create unique motivational challenges. And so for me, vocabulary is a way to offer students a small success to keep them going. I feel like I have to have all these small successes throughout the term, otherwise it can feel very dispiriting, right? Imagine those, you remember those papers you got back in college and all those marks? And if you keep just getting those and you don't feel like you have a small success, it's hard to sort of keep going with any high level of motivation. So what are some effective approaches that I use for vocabulary instruction? Corpus-informed vocabulary lessons, so making sure to draw from the academic word list, right? So that I'm making sure to include high-frequency academic vocabulary in my lessons. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Making sure to study and practice longer chunks of language, collocations and phrases. And an activity progression that goes from noticing to understanding to explaining. And I'll show what that means in just a minute. Let's talk about corpus-informed vocabulary. Why draw from the academic word list for our vocabulary lessons? I think we have to think about what distinguishes an EAP course from a general English course, right? We are helping our students prepare for academic coursework, right? And I just pulled some of the academic words from the academic word list here just to sort of give you a flavor. economic, emphasize, evaluate, factor, flexible, focus, and so on, you can see that for me, the academic word list represents a sort of skeletal core of lexical expression in academic writing. And so we don't have to exclusively use the academic word list to create our lessons, but if we do have a strong corpus-informed approach, we know we're exposing students to that skeletal core, right? We know that we're doing that. So many of you may be familiar with Paul Nation, who wrote Learning Vocabulary in Another Language, right? Vocabulary expert. He's been very influential in all of my lessons around vocabulary. Highly recommend learning vocabulary in another language. And he writes, the benefits of knowing high-frequency vocabulary balance the time and effort required for direct vocabulary instruction. Right? We have limited time with our EAP students, right? We have limited time, but we're trying to develop their academic voice. Drawing on the academic word list to create your lessons will ensure that you have a targeted approach to helping your students build vocabulary. One way I approach it, because I tend to teach English for special purposes, I tend to teach students where there's a relatively homogeneous group of graduate students, for example, in a specific discipline. So for me, the strongest combination, and I know some of you in here do the same, so I'm going to mention this quickly. The strongest combination for me for my vocabulary lessons is the field-specific language that you don't have in the academic word list and the academic word list words, right? So, for example, when I was working with my public policy and international affairs students, I might be working with words like imperialism and neoconservative, with collocations with the academic word list like these: legal framework, fundamental rights. This is going to give them the core of expression they need to write with what they're being asked to write in their courses. But, you know, if you're not teaching an ESP class, if you're teaching a general academic, you know, EAP course, it's still very important to use the academic word list, right? It's a sort of perfect recycling opportunity. Because they are high-frequency words in academic texts, we know they're going to see them again and again and again throughout their college career, right? So we're sort of setting them up for a success at the ground level. If we start in our courses helping students build this vocabulary, we know they'll see it again and again in articles, in textbooks, in lectures, in discussions. They're going to have that grounding as they move beyond your class. Okay, I also want to have a 50-50 balance between studying individual words and longer chunks of language like collocations and phrases. If you just glance at these collocations that I listed here and these phrases, you can, I think it's evident how this could help students develop their academic voice, right? If you've been reading and writing in English all of your life, this might be a bank of language you already have, but our students don't have it, right? And we don't have to have them reinvent the wheel, right? We know that there are these longer chunks of language that show up in language and in academic language. And we know that these longer chunks of language make our writing sound more natural, more professional, more mature, more advanced, however you want to say it, right? And often more concise. Right? I don't know if you've had this experience, but you get a long, wordy string, and I can often help students just by, you know, revising it with one collocation. Right? So it helps with conciseness as well. So once I've decided on my corpus vocabulary and the longer chunks of language that I want to focus on, probably from a reading I'm working with, I want to make sure that my students make that language their own. Have you had this experience where you've taught a vocabulary lesson and then you don't see it in their writing? Yeah, it's like, well, we worked on that. You know, why isn't it in the essay? And so this activity progression from noticing to understanding to explaining can help your students with retention and understanding. And I found that when I use this activity progression, I see it in my students' writing and I hear it in their speaking. So noticing the vocabulary in some way, calling it out, maybe it's bolded in the text, then understanding activities, defining in some way, maybe defining key terms, or writing sentences, and then explaining relationships. And I thought in this audience, many of you would already be familiar with 1 and 2, noticing and understanding, and so I thought I would just take a moment to share a couple of lessons that I do for explaining relationships or associational activities. Here's one lesson where I have students work in groups or pairs to explain opposite concepts, right? Or the differences between concepts. Okay, so for example, I work with art and design students a lot. So, and this is just an excerpt. There would be more samples. This is just for showing you. So for example, top-down design versus bottom-up design. This came up in my recent lesson, actually, with my graduate students here. And there's a cute story about this. I have a student in the class. Many of my students in the class actually are right now in interviews for internships. Maybe some of you have students that are interviewing. So at the end of the class, yesterday, actually, my students said in the last class they would like to talk about what they might get asked on an interview. And it's like, well, that could be anything, right? I mean, but they wanted to sort of have a sense of like, what might I be asked on an internship interview? So I said, well, has anyone here been on an interview recently? I had 2 students that had been on an interview. And so I asked the one student to share, what were you asked? What did they ask you? And she said, well, they asked me about why I came to New York and why I'm studying at Parsons. And then they asked me to explain a little bit about social design and open innovation. I said, oh, well, what did you say? She said, well, I explained the difference between top-down and bottom-up design and how bottom-up design is related to social innovation and open innovation, how that's a concept that connects. It had become her language. And I thought, success, I hear the vocabulary. But, the thing is, it had become hers because she could explain it, right? If you can explain the difference between 2 concepts, you understand them, right? And it becomes yours, right? And so it had become her language, and so she was able to use it fluently in an interview because it was hers. But we'd been through this progression with noticing and understanding, and then we got to this point where we're still working with the same words, but we're deepening it by explaining opposite concepts. If you're working in a thematic curricula, you can see, I gave some examples, you can make up anything that you're working on, right? A second vocabulary lesson for associational activities, for explaining relationships, is explaining the relationships between sets of words. Not across the sets, but the sets within, the words within a set, okay? And this is another activity that I've had a lot of success with. And you often have to model this right away for the students because it can be a little confusing at first. Once they understand how to do it, it's not confusing. So basically, I model the first set, and I would say something like, one relationship between top-down design and strategic design initiatives and strong actors, that strong actors and strategic design initiatives are all part of top-down design. Okay? Usually in top-down design, you have a strong, usually a leader or well-known designer that has a vision and that it's sort of going to get executed, right? Rather than a bottom-up approach where there might be consensus building or maybe even help from the community, right? So I give one relationship and then I set them off in their groups and pairs and ask them to work through the rest of the sets, okay? But again, this deepens the connection for them. The language really does become their own. When I use this progression, and this is a great jumping off point to then go to writing, I see the words used in their writing. It's used in their speaking. It's been successful for me with this progression. I just thought I would show you a sample of what you could do. Maybe you're working on the topic of gender, maybe. If in set B, for example, women's rights movement, equal pay for equal work, and gender discrimination, you could model for them that one relationship is that in the women's rights movement, there was a movement to end gender discrimination and called for equal pay for equal work, right? Now, I'm working with advanced students and graduate students and my art and design students, but you can make this your own for the language that you're working after you draw from the corpus, right, and your lexical chunks. Okay, I'd like to end talking a little bit about plagiarism, right? I saved the most exciting topic for last, right? Usually when you mention plagiarism in your classes, there's like a pall that comes over the room. It's like a dark cloud and everybody gets really shut down and quiet. The thing about plagiarism is that we're dealing with it so much right now, and we've gotten really good at detecting it, but we still have trouble preventing it, right? Our students are doing it a lot. I mean, would you say that you're dealing with this every semester? Yeah, I'm dealing with this just as a matter of course. It's like a part-time job, actually, dealing with plagiarism. It's like, again, it's mainly what I do after class. I talk to students and tell them, well, you have work cited here, but there's no in-text citations. Let's review that again. This is something that I deal with all semester informally, and sometimes I've had to do it through a formal process, right? So, but okay, so why are our L2 students plagiarizing so much? What do you think are some of the reasons that our students are plagiarizing?
They don't have the skills to avoid it.
They don't have the skills to avoid it, yeah. Others? They don't realize they're doing it. Many don't realize they're doing it, yeah. Think they can get away with it. There are always people that can think they can get away with it, right? But now that we have the surveillance, right? But yes, so there are some people that just are going to cheat. But then there are these other issues too, right?
Well, in one case, I just had one. He actually thought it was okay. He really, culturally, he thought it was okay. He goes, I imitate to speak. Why can't I just imitate to write? And we had a long talk.
Okay.
Why it's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but he actually thought it was totally okay because in his culture it was okay to do.
Interesting. I just listed, sounds like some of the things that you're already saying, right? Unaware of what constitutes plagiarism, the skills issues, the pressure associated with high stakes tests and exams. Some do argue a cultural factor, although there is disagreement in the L2 literature on plagiarism about this. I mean, I've read the literature a little bit because I've presented on plagiarism, and there's disagreement. You know, there's some people that say it is a cultural factor. Some feel like it's made. You know, I had a student that plagiarized last semester, and she also did say that she felt like it was, you know, in her country it was okay. But after the 40-minute talk, she ended up saying, you know, I was busy. And I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, and I felt she felt overwhelmed, and she just did it. She cut and paste. So you know, maybe it's a factor, but you know, how much of a factor in each case, you know, I don't know. So I think there are a number of reasons why. How can we help? Well, one thing I'd like to say before I zero in on paraphrasing is that I think we have to adopt a more comprehensive approach, because I think, at least in the past, I might have dealt with it with an academic integrity pledge on the first day, and then comes up again during attribution activities, and then that's it. I mean, it's 2 exposures, and for the student that's unaware of what constitutes plagiarism, for the student that lacks the skills, I think it's not enough 2 exposures, right? But the reality is I'm just dealing with this more than I've ever dealt with it before, so I feel I need to adopt a more comprehensive approach, where I teach skills and strategies, and I teach them regularly throughout the term, and I start early in the term. I don't sort of wait until the middle or when we get to an attribution activity. So I think that that's just important, and even for programs, I think it's important for programs to start early at the lower levels, because I think a lot of these concepts take a long time to digest, right, for some of our students. Especially, you know, paraphrasing is really challenging. So let's talk about paraphrasing for a minute. We know that it's one way students can adopt an academic voice, right? Because they're bringing in expert opinion into their paper. They're bringing out an outside source for some reason. But it's an extremely challenging skill. It's a skill that also helps them avoid plagiarism, but very challenging also for native speakers, right? Very challenging skill. So, couple of insights that might help with your teaching practice. One thing that I want to mention is the concept of patch writing. Rebecca Moore Howard from Syracuse University coined this term in her 1992 article on plagiarism, and she defines patch writing as copying from a source text and then deleting some words, altering grammatical structures, or plugging in one-for-one synonym substitutes, right? Another way of saying that is paraphrasing too closely to the original, right? And she could have just said paraphrasing too closely to the original, but she wanted to coin this term because she saw many instances of plagiarism in her classes, in her undergraduate classes, but she didn't feel that they were really plagiarizing. She felt like they were just at a less mature writing stage, and that they were trying something out. They were experimenting. They were patch writing, in her view. And so she suggests that we focus more on the purpose for attribution than on the mechanics, right? I think sometimes we can get really involved in, reminding you've got to credit the author, use a reporting verb, use the quotation marks here, this is the in-text citation. But that's something that maybe has to come later, after the student has the conceptual understanding of attribution. Why are we using other people's voices in our own papers, right? So that's one suggestion that I would make, just being influenced by her work, is that now I make sure to look at a lot of samples of paraphrasing first before I ask students to paraphrase. So we look at a lot of contextualized examples, and we sort of try to parse it out. Why was this source used? What was the source used for? Was it to set up a refutation? Was it to agree with someone's opinion? What was the purpose of using this outside source? So that's sort of my goal, is to focus on that first before I have them do paraphrasing practice. One other thing, in her article, she theorized that the reason her students were plagiarizing so much is that she had them working with very challenging nonfiction texts. And the reason she theorized this is that she knew of other classes where students were paraphrasing, summarizing lower level narrative texts, less challenging texts, and there were fewer instances of plagiarism. So she just thought that might have been one reason. Maybe it's the text level. Well, is it the text level? Maybe it is the text level, right? We have research that shows that text level may encourage plagiarism or paraphrasing too closely, right? Miguel Roy, a professor of psychology here at St. John's University, conducted 2 studies on plagiarism. His first study, he was really just interested in finding out, investigating, when students paraphrase, do they know they have to substantially alter the original, right? He just wanted to know that, right? So he gave about 200 students at 2 private colleges here in New York a 2-sentence text to paraphrase, and it had a Flesch-Kincaid grade scale of 15.6, which is pretty high, right? The New York Times is about a 10, so that gives you a sense that, so the 2-sentence text had a grade level, a US grade level of 15.6. Some of you may know the Flesch-Kincaid readability calculator. You can punch in the text and it analyzes it for text complexity. It looks at syntax and vocabulary and sentence length, that kind of thing, and then assigns a grade level. 46% plagiarized. Wow, that's a lot, right? That's almost 50%. I don't see any surprised faces, but it seems like a lot, doesn't it? Almost 50%. Well, what was just as interesting to him were the unplagiarized responses. A majority of the students that did not plagiarize lost the meaning of the original. Okay? So that led him to conduct the second study, okay? The second study, and this time he dropped the grade level. He gave them a 2-sentence text of 11.2. So if you just think about the New York Times for a minute, that's about a 10, 11, so that gives you a sense, okay? In this case, only 15% of the responses were plagiarized. And the unplagiarized responses were more accurate, okay, than in the first study, okay? I think this confirms Rebecca Moore-Howard's guess. It confirms my own experience. Perhaps it confirms your experience when you're dealing with a challenging text and you see that the student has used all of the words of the original, right? So what are the implications for our teaching practice? Now, when I have students do paraphrasing practice, after I've reviewed the purpose of why we attribute, I try to choose a text for practice that's right at the level or one level lower, right? This is not reading practice where we might want to go, +1. This is for paraphrasing practice. I'm trying to build skills. This is early in the term. So I try to use a right at the level text or one level lower. Students are more able to do it. That's what I found. If you want them to work with a more challenging text for some reason, then I would just say try to do as much scaffolding as you can to make sure that they understand what they've read, right? And this can be done, I do it as a close reading with an open class, but you could have students work in small groups to do an oral summary. that kind of thing, as a check on whether or not they understand the original before you set them off to do paraphrasing practice? Have you ever paraphrased along with your students and had a moment where you thought, well, yeah, it's taking me a little longer. Maybe this was a challenging text to give to the students, right? But so for practice, I think for practice we have to write at the level or go one level lower, okay? So, you know, small changes you can make in your curriculum, maybe that will make a big impact, I hope. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions, and then we can move the questions into the wine reception, right? Don't you want to move the questions into the wine reception? Yeah. The New School does not use Turnitin. To my knowledge, the New School does not use Turnitin. I have worked at institutions where Turnitin is used, and it is good at detecting. It's actually very good at detecting.
In 2 seconds, you get this score on exactly this, like color code on how big the percentages are. I mean, that's what we did when I was doing the thesis writing class over in one of my colleges, and it's the greatest tool in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely good at detecting, but we still have students that are plagiarizing, even with detection, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
It's really a question, but I have students writing summaries a lot, and a lot of textbooks insist that you summarize in the exact order that the idea is presented, which I completely disagree with. And what I've started doing is trying to get students to see something that's kind of repeated, or it's the same idea in that second part, so you don't need to repeat that idea, or how does this kind of add to that? And it just makes them think a little bit more than just paraphrasing each sentence in a row, but really it helps them to understand the reading.
A lot of things that we have to unteach, right? That happens.
Textbooks insist that a summary must be written in the order in which the ideas appear in the reading.
Yeah, which is not true, right? You don't have to do that, right? So yeah, I mean, that's and students have been taught that, and other things. Sometimes students are taught in this way because, you know, English at a certain level is seen as sort of a training ground, so to speak. You know, it's like later, you know, it'll be different. But but then that's what we face, right? So we unteach things.
How do you determine your particular student group's flesh and reading in order to make that determination?
Yeah, I mean, at different institutions it's different, but you know, students are given a level, assigned a level when they come into the program, and so I sort of know and then I do reading activities at the beginning, and I can kind of see. I don't determine the Flesch-Kincaid readability score, but the readings that I do, and I do a quick check diagnostics at the beginning for writing and reading, and I kind of know what they can do in terms of the level. Yeah, I guess that's what I would suggest. You could work with the Flesch-Kincaid and check the readability level of anything you want to work with. Any other questions? Jackie.
This is not so much about the focus, the third part of your talk, which is this focus on building skills to avoid plagiarism. But I'm just kind of throwing this out here to the group, because lately you said we're very good at detecting plagiarism, but lately the kind of plagiarism that we've been coming across is more difficult to detect. I don't know if other people have been coming across this kind of thing where it could be partly translation software, partly like a friend is writing it, but it's sometimes it's really hard to detect. So I'm just throwing that out there. Other people have been running into this kind of fine line where it's like, I don't really know what's going on here.
I've had that where it's sort of like, you know, just can't find that on the internet, but that sounds really graduate level, and it's not a graduate class, or there are patches, but you can't find it. And you experience that as well? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a student told me that it's okay to use translation software.
Well, okay, in what sense, I guess, is the question, right? But maybe I think that's an opportunity for a conversation about the essay. You'd like to talk about your essay, you know, tell me more about these ideas. You know, if you really think that it's been plagiarized, you could have an informal conversation where you just ask the student to tell you more about these ideas that they've written and see what happens. Are we ready for wine? Oh, one question. Okay, one question and then wine. Okay. Oh, sweet. I planted him, by the way. He's a plant. I have a lot of positive feedback to the things that I've presented today, and that's why I chose to present them, because I feel like there were small changes that I made that I felt were successes for the students. And there were other things I could have presented on that we're limited on time, so I wanted to choose things that I thought were small things that I do feel like students have had a positive impact. I have had students say, can you work with me after class too? You know, that kind of thing, so yeah. Thank you so much, so much, so much.